I still need time to finish up my next project, and I'm working on a collab project, so I thought, why not? Let's do more Zelda. Let's keep this simple. You know what's about to happen, so there doesn't need to be an intro. Only 2 rules. First, this is not limited to 1 game per franchise. It was really hard as it was to find 10 bosses as it was since they're rather standard throughout the series. And 2, unlike my giant Zelda bosses countdown where I was trying to stay generalized, this is my personal list, meaning bosses I personally like in my opinion. With that, let's get started. MANHANDLA is cool because it shoves the argument back at critics saying Oracle of Seasons bosses are simple rehashes from the original Legend of Zelda. While that is true for some cases like Aqua Mentis and Dodongo, MANHANDLA is nothing like the original, and instead of bombs to blow them up in one hit, you use a magical boomerang, which is one of the coolest items from the Legend of Zelda series. Plus, look at this place. There's sections where the sand is pushing you around to keep the difficulty up, and with the consistent barrage of attacks coming from MANHANDLA, plus with MANHANDLA's bulky size, you'll be moving all the time to get out of the way and wondering just how to get on the offensive with this battle, which is a really thrilling feature of this battle. Unlike a lot of other Zelda bosses as well, every time a pedal comes off, MANHANDLA gets faster and faster to the point where it becomes like an action movie, and it's difficult to keep track of your attacks and MANHANDLA's attacks. Oracle of Seasons has a lot of great action-oriented bosses, which is what I respect from the game compared to other Zelda games. While it may be true that I respect Oracle of Ages a lot more for its puzzles, there are no Oracle of Ages bosses on this list because I prefer faster action for my boss battles, which Oracle of Seasons provides. When it comes to the coolest items and bosses from the Legend of Zelda series, Oracle of Seasons is really out there to being the best Zelda game for me in providing the entertainment. Now this part baffles me. Left to right I hear Zelda fans complain that King Dodongo or other Zelda bosses are easy all the time. But here's the thing. This is a game series with an E rating on it, meaning 6 years old or above. Which means since I'm 26, I'm 20 years overqualified to take down Zelda bosses. Meaning 95% of them will be easy to figure out and beat down. Except for this one. I like the Imprisoned because it didn't follow the 1, 2, 3 step rule when it came to bosses. It put up some resistance and things like flinging you off its back, which other Zelda bosses don't. It has some unpredictable paths due to the geysers and strategy to get around, and the difficulty was really encouraging because I'm not the type of video gamer where I want bosses to lay on their back and let me kill them. I appreciate the challenge. I never really found the Imprisoned too hard as Zelda fans say. It came down to having a cool head and knowing when to plan your attacks. So when it came to problems like him flinging you off his back or its shockwaves with his toes, I had enough extra time set aside to give those another go. So I'd say he was as tough as the Dark Dragon from Oracle of Seasons. Tough, but not impossibly hard. This will be an interesting opinion, like I don't do that enough. I personally think about 90% of 3D Zelda bosses are easy. In fact, I think that's the biggest flaw of the 3D Zelda games. I'm dead serious. The 2D Zelda bosses will wipe the floor with what their 3D counterparts can offer nowadays in terms of being unpredictable, difficulty, and the ways you can beat them. So whenever I play 3D Zelda games, bosses aren't something to have high expectations for in terms of gameplay, but I do sometimes get into the build up and 3D dynamics of these bosses, and in my opinion, BLIZZETA wins hands down. Love the Snow Peak ruins, love the eerie beginning, love the environment, love the build up, love the music, just fantastic visuals. Now don't get me wrong, despite what I said about 3D Zelda bosses, I still appreciate them all the same. I don't mind easy games or bosses, especially if it boasts qualities that the 2D Zelda games wish they had. Being locked up in a small space of a bedroom, the ice and build-up effects, this music, oh my goodness, the 2D Zelda games had no chance to live up to this kind of atmosphere. While BLIZZETA may be easy, and I agree with that from some Zelda players, each boss from the 2D and 3D era games involves elements I enjoy each of them for. And BLIZZETA, you did good from the 3D side. This is by far the boss that surprised me the most, hands down on this list, especially since the Post Sisters are a mini-boss of all places. Hey, I said nothing about not counting mini-bosses, so it's fair game. I meant everything I said in the top 288 Legend of Zelda bosses. These two sisters are brutal with their strategy. What's happening is that they both take turns attacking you with their sword and magic, which each sister has respectively, but very often they'll be blowing out the 4 torches in the room. At which if they all go out, then you restart the dungeon, almost like a Wallmaster effect. I remember being around in 6th grade when I tackled the Oracle games my first time, and I've never seen such a drastic tone to gameplay before in any Zelda games. I was going through the dungeon at a mellow rate, then all of a sudden it drops this big bag of strategy right on my lap, and I have to say, man, you got me there, game. And that's why I love the Post Sisters. It dropped arguably one of the biggest surprise packages in the series, and the boss execution is simply fantastic and in a league of its own. It boasts some multitasking, it was hard, it had my eyes open to everything that was happening, and overall, awesome boss battle. Let's see, Twilight Princess is my favorite 3D Zelda game. Now combine that with the most popular boss in Twilight Princess, guess what we get? What is there left to be said? You've heard about all of the awesome things in this battle, but I bet there's one thing you haven't heard yet. The speed. The faster a boss battle goes, the more it'll shoot up through my ranks like wildfire. And Stallord, along with everything else you've heard from everyone else, reached my top 10 easily. What stands out about this battle you don't see often with 3D Zelda bosses is that the boss has a decent defense. It's not a simple 1, 2 and booyah you're done type of boss. Stallord puts up obstacles at completely random places when you approach its spine with your spinner, and it doesn't get any more satisfying to work that fast spinner around the complicated tactic. The second part is pure nostalgia and speed overload from the music and execution. Even though it's far easier, you just don't care. It just bleeds awesomeness all over the place. Again, you've heard it all. You've heard it from me that this boss is far from being bare bones. Despite that, Stallord's design does have bare bones. Huh. This one above Stallord, huh? Guess these last 5 are really gonna need some explaining. Alright, let's do this. A big thing I appreciate from the Temple of Droplets from Minish Cap is its claustrophobic atmosphere. And from my top 18 personal favorite dungeons, you know that I gave this dungeon a lot of credit for that with its unique gimmicks and execution. The big OCTOROK follows in these footsteps tremendously and keeps the trend going. If you haven't noticed already, Big OCTOROK is the biggest boss in the game in a really tight room, so it adds the variety of tension and keeping your eyes out for what the boss is going to do. Plus add on the ice and water effects, the room getting dark at points, rocks pummeling from the ceiling, and it's an incredibly fulfilling boss in my books to fight. I've always loved the concept of being intimidated by bosses. The more powerful and threatening enemies are in video games, the more I cherish those moments of fighting them, because it makes the adventure 1,000 times more memorable. There is no adventure without danger to your life, and man, Minish Cap. Whew. You know, there's something fishy. Throughout the Oracle games, TWINROVA has been presenting herself as the true enemy who has been reviving Ganon behind the scenes, but in a last-ditch effort, she sacrifices herself instead of Zelda. I wonder if this is why Ganon is so stupid, because they didn't use the proper sacrifice for the ritual. It's interesting to think about, but aside from that theory, there's amazing build-up to this fight. Like, you've gone through 16 dungeons, and if the difficulty matches up with what's happening after all of that, what an awesome endgame boss fight to seal the Oracle games together for its overall experience, and it contributes a huge portion to why I love both of these games. They never disappoint. Now, you probably noticed that I put TWINROVA and not the first part because it sucks so bad. The second half is where it's all at. Everything is here. The difficulty is peaked, the suspense is packed full, the energy is riveting, the strategy and timing is well thought out and not easy to get to. It gets all full marks across the boards. I hope they make another Legend of Zelda boss like this again. This is what causes retro gaming blood to shoot through the roof and brings out the pinnacle I relish in the 2D Zelda games. This is the boss battle that brings out my biggest difficulty satisfaction high out of every Zelda boss in the series. This boss, in my opinion, is the best boss in implementing the item from the dungeon to its fullest effect. Period. Let's break it down. DIGDOGGER is a boss that hops all around the room all the time, and the only way to make it vulnerable is to use your super mega awesome magnetic gloves to shove the metal spike ball in the room towards it. Oh no, it is not that simple. This is the very first time you're using the gloves this way with an unpredictable object like this. Now pan that out with how often the boss moves and that you can get hurt from the ball, and it's a chaotic mess. It's a lot of things to keep track of, and you're working with something entirely new at the same time. No matter how experienced you are with this game and this boss, it's a different treat every time because it's spontaneous nature of movement. Plus add on that if you hit DIGDOGGER enough, you break him up into smaller versions where you can truly hurt him. But I dare you to be able to hit those little buggers. They move so fast and they're so small for the ball to hit. Overall, you can't. You can't beat this level of originality in my opinion. It's extremely hard, extremely fun, extremely suspenseful, extremely unpredictable, just a lot of extremes going around, and definitely deserving of being the extreme number 3 on this list. But if this is the best used item, what could possibly beat it? I don't care what anyone says. Ganondorf from Twilight Princess is my favorite 3D Zelda boss by so far because it incorporates everything from what I love about Twilight Princess into this fight. I need to say something before I go on. I'm not a gamer who looks for a 10 out of 10 out of every video game I play. I know every video game has strengths and flaws. There is no such thing as a perfect game in the world. Twilight Princess isn't perfect, and players can nitpick it like every other Zelda game and video game out there and go 10 out of 10 on its butt, but I really don't care if it happens to have things I happen to enjoy from video games personally. The thing I absolutely number 1 adore from 3D Zelda games is the incredibly atmospheric and immersive worlds these games bring to the table, and this moment reeks of everything I love from a 3D Zelda game. Perfect music, perfect build-up, perfect environment, perfect sounds, perfect moment, a perfect tie-up to a Zelda game. Now if somebody brings up the lack of difficulty, this is my brutal response. I don't play 3D Zelda games for my difficulty cravings. They're the easiest games in this series hands down. I played the 2D Zelda games to fulfill that quota, but like BLIZZETA and STALLORD, the 2D Zelda games don't match up to what the 3D Zelda games can do in terms of visual presentation on all their fronts. So this is my bottom line. Screw difficulty and enjoy the environment. That's the entire point of 3D Zelda games and what makes them fantastic. Think of Ganondorf that I just mentioned, and now add on some 2D Zelda game difficulty and DS style gameplay, and that sums up what I love about MALLADUS. I don't think I mentioned this, but I love the Nintendo DS. It's why Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks are high on my list as it is, and well, this boss peaks in what the DS can do. While the first part isn't the most exhilarating in my opinion, having to defend Zelda for about a minute from the incoming fireballs, the next two phases, I can't breathe. Can't breathe. The song that plays in the second phase with the pan flute is my favorite Zelda song of all time because of its unbelievable magic, especially with the addition of the other instruments. The setup is perfect, and just like Link right here, you can feel every inch of blood just pumping up for the final boss, and I knew it wasn't going to disappoint, and it didn't. For the first time in a Zelda game, Zelda fights with you on the front lines just as she has been through the Tower of Spirits. The battle then becomes a fantastic tactics game of multitasking and immersion from both screens. Did I mention I love the Nintendo DS? That godlike final boss music is playing. The gameplay is stretched to the imaginations of the DS with Zelda and Link with their own screen, and every moment at this point just works seamlessly to an excellent end of one of the best final boss battles I've ever played. And when the sword cuts through at the final moments, you know a rare magical moment in the Zelda series is born. My favorite Zelda boss of all time.